Okay. I'm here with Christa, who is now the CFO of OpenTable, but who I met a very long time back when she was one of the head analysts at Weisel. Welcome to Meet the Operators.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just caught up on a whole bunch of interesting different arcs in your career, and you've been through companies at all sorts of different types of scale. But maybe let's start quickly at the beginning, and you can just bring people up to speed at kind of where Playdom was when you made the jump from Wall Street over to this crazy tech universe that we live in.
I spent a decade on Wall Street as a internet research analyst, bringing companies like Google public, and then decided to stop armchair quarterbacking and actually get in the game and do something, and join a company called Playdom. At the time was one of the leaders in the social gaming space, and this is circa 2009 to give you a sense of time. And I joined the company, and it was 175 people, just done about 50 million of revenue, and but it was on a rapid scale, pace to scale. Yeah. So there was a leader in the market called Zynga at the time, and who, we were number two to, and, spending a lot of time trying to figure out what is this market? What are we doing? Are we building platforms? Are we building games? Are we building content? What is the face of what these things are going to look like over time? And so, I think, we were kind of making the playbook up as we went. And so, I don't think there was there is no known path in social gaming. The industry didn't exist before. Yeah. And so a lot of it is, how do you fail as fast as you possibly can? How do you make cheaper mistakes? How do you not, simultaneously invest in, 10 things and not know if any of them are going to actually return?
Where did you draw your inspiration from, or who were your mentors kind of through that period of growth as you were figuring all this out?
I did reach out. I have a bunch of people that were helpful for me. So like Ellen Siminoff is somebody that I know well, and she was, I think, number 8 at Yahoo, and had seen, again, all scales of companies, and had good wisdom and advice for that. The other thing was, surprisingly, the Wall Street background actually helped in some ways, which was I was good at mapping out a what if scenario, and I had a lot of what ifs, and really the pattern recognition of what businesses looked like really small, and then what they look like at scale. And so you kind of understand, okay, this has this flavor of business model, and this is what this looks like over time, and this is what that margin structure may look like, or it doesn't, or like, oh, that's going to need a lot of salespeople if we actually go down this path, and then this is what this is going to look like, and this is how this is going to be operationally difficult. And so having seen everything from ad models to subscription to freemium models to consumer pay to cloud-based models, sort of weaving that into my own kind of viewpoint helped shape gave me knowledge before I had it.
Great. And so where was Playdom so we talked about when you started, when the Disney acquisition happened, where had the scale gotten to, I guess?
So we went from 175 people to 600 in a span of 10 months. We acquired 8 companies in 8 months. Most of those were all acqui-hires or some technology-related hires, but and then we were geographically dispersed. So we had operations in Bangalore, Argentina, Bangladesh, plus 6 or 7 locations in the U.S. So we also had operational complexity. We were not just in one spot, which would have been easy, but, we had cultural challenges for companies that didn't, kind of grow up with us. So kind of putting all that together and having it make sense was yes, to say, understatement is a challenge.
Lessons learned, I know there's probably going to be a lot, but if you had to think about, what drove you the craziest that now that you look back on it, probably now you look back on it and smile, but at the time, in that period of time, like, what do you think most people struggle the most with? I
think it's really just being excellent at a few things, as opposed, there's sort of the infinite possibility, right? And I think most entrepreneurs, they wouldn't be entrepreneurs if you couldn't think of the infinite possibility and all these amazing things that could happen. But what are the 3 that we can actually do tomorrow? Like, so I always, I'd come after like a big vision meeting and I go, okay, how do we actually march on Monday? What do you do differently tomorrow because of what we've thought of now today? How do you inflate, kind of pivot or change direction based on that? And so the breadth of all the things that you'd want to do and all the things you could do, but what can you actually get done? Yeah. And it would drive me crazy that we'd kind of go down these rabbit holes, and many of them, and we'd end up with nothing at the bottom of the rabbit hole sometimes, and that was frustrating. And so but it's a balance too, like, because if you one of the things I've also learned is that if you are in polar ends like extreme risk and no risk, it's actually worse for a startup to take no risk. And so you may blow up in a fiery ball by taking risk, but it's a more dangerous outcome to not take enough risk actually as a startup. And so I think it is always that balance of like, what's the smartest risk I can take today? Because you never get known information, because if you wait until it's known, there's no return. I mean, if you wait until there's no risk, there's no return. So it is like, how do I meet out and prioritize all these different risks? So
thinking tactically for a second, is there a favorite or a preferred method that you have in terms of thinking about prioritization? So, if your team now at OpenTable, which we'll come back to, but is coming to you and presenting you with the plan, and you have to decide between 5 or 6 things that you might have the option to do, of which you can do 2, how do you think about picking?
I mean, one is just straight up TAM, or I guess their addressable market. It's how big could this be, and you'll be wrong 100% of the time, but you at least have to have an assessment of like, is this a $1 billion opportunity? Is it a $10 million opportunity? So what is the scale and proportion of the opportunity? And then what are the things what are the signposts that I'm actually going to be on the right track? Because, part of it is like, okay, I'm not going to just throw 200 people at it and say, see in a year. It's more like, okay, how do I learn cheaply? How do I fail fast? How do I use, at Playdom, we did some really interesting things where we knew that the only mechanism for distribution was Facebook. And so at the time, and so we put out, an ad on Facebook for a game that didn't exist yet to see and understand what is the addressable, like what is the demand flows for that game going to be, and then we'd land them on a some sort of questionnaire at the end to see if they'd actually play it. But it was more, and that was sort of interesting, but it was we didn't really get as much from the questionnaire as I did as to, okay, who clicks on this, who doesn't, what are the things that I can learn without actually investing a ton of money to decide whether or not we should continue to go forward. So it's a lot of it is just, how do I get to the fail state in the cheapest way possible? How do I learn as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible? So, putting, 5 engineers on a quick and dirty project. I'm a huge believer in duct tape and chicken wire to get something done, like in a really, perhaps even unscalable, most of the time it's unscalable fashion. But just to get information and data to say, what's the binary, good or bad? If so, keep turning cards and continue to see the next, hopefully good move in the right direction.
Yeah. And how, from a planning standpoint, are you a fan of, obviously it's changed as the company sizes have now grown, and now you're obviously a public company, so it's a little bit different, but do you plan 3 months out? Do you plan 6 months out? Plan a year out?
All the above. So actually no. We plan really 3 months out and kind of 3 years out. So the 3 month is like, we better get the teams and the goals and everybody understanding exactly what they have to hit and to be on point. So what are the KPIs that need to be put in place, and what do they need to hit, and who's sweating if they're not hitting them, and that's really important. And then I think it's really important to take the step back and to helicopter up and say, okay, where are we headed? What are there places that we can do and invest in? Now, what do we have to do today to make some of that be a reality? And so I think it's important to just do it every so often. Now, whether or not the whole organization will pivot as a result of that 3. It's just more around like what are these things? What's changed in the market? How big are these investments that we potentially could go in and make and take? Disney, we did 5-year planning, which was probably a little bit too long. And it's just more the exercise of getting you to think outside of the day-to-day and the tactical. And many companies, especially startup land, I mean, it's hard not to be in day-to-day tactical almost all the time. I mean, it's a firefight most days in startup land. And so, I think it's just important to kind of pull up every now and survey the landscape and make sure that, there aren't big things that you shouldn't be taking a look at.
So let's touch on the day-to-day for a second, because, you've gone through multiple different iterations. How do you manage your day-to-day? Are you a meeting person? Are you a send me a weekly update person? Like what's the best way for you?
I think I do. It's funny. I don't know if it's like born out of the time at Disney, but I do actually like a good meeting if it has a purpose.
Good.
So the meetings. In fact, this was often the frustrating thing where there's places where it's like have the meeting before their meeting, so there's no surprises in the meetings. That's not how I like to run a meeting. I don't have time for the obfuscation. The thing I like about a good meeting, which is if it does have purpose, it's like how do you get to the truth, how do you get to the decision node, and then how do you move as a result of that. So like how do you actually figure out what it is that you're trying to solve, get to it, articulate it, and then set things in motion. So people in motion, teams in motion, etc. And it's really hard to do that in any other format. And so, but you have to have a group that's really willing to be honest and get to the truth. Yeah. And, if you have a bunch of people who are like obfuscating reality, then you're not going to make progress. And so that's why, in fact, on my own teams, I encourage dissension, disagreement. I want all the ugly truth in my like safe ensconce of my team, so that when I go out, I've like kind of been forged. I'm through the crucible. I've been tested by people on my team with different opinions, and how do we kind of get at what's really happening here, so that we can actually get to what we need to do, so that we can actually move, and so you can move faster.
So let's talk about the dissension piece. Is actually, I find, so a lot of people have been touching on this as I've been doing these interviews around ways. It's not easy to actually encourage dissension sometimes, right? Because they have to be trustworthy, comfortable, respectful, especially if you're the new person in a company, right? Is there anything that you found that like makes it easier for people to dissent? I mean, it's kind of like
humor, honestly. So I find that if you can soften someone, you can get
self-deprecating humor?
Often, many times. Yes, which is you kind of. You break it down and you soften the situation so that somebody on the other side is like, oh, I can hear it now. I can hear the truth, and it's a way to make it not so painful. And it's not your issue or my issue. It's there's an issue here, and if we can create some levity around it, now we create some openness and acceptance. And so then when you have that acceptance, then you can start to move. But it's like, how do you get those difficult messages? How do you get people to hear the things that they may not want to hear, and I think you can do it. And you have to be empathetic, and you have to be a human being, and I think you have to figure out how to do that. So I love and people environments that appreciate good humor. I feel like you can get it, and maybe it's because I've also been in creative environments too, that it ends up going pretty far and is appreciated.
Well, that's a pretty something that you kind of build into the culture of a company, right? And maybe some people don't necessarily equate culture and kind of values with traditional CFO or COO, but I know we were talking previously, have spent a lot of time thinking about people's psychologies and desire. How do you drive results? So how do you think about culture, as it relates to both creating humor in meetings, honesty? Is there a guidebook for you? Is there a
I don't know that there's a guidebook. I wish there was. But I do think it is the, sort of the honesty, like the getting to the truth. That was something that I would, say all the time in meetings, which is, and making sure that the data has a voice in that truth, frankly. Oftentimes it used to be, there was a loud person in the room and that they won the argument and then they went off. But how do you actually infuse those discussions with data to help, provide truth? But I think it's really, not putting up with the drama. I'm not putting up with the, like, you know, he said, she, like, just like, what is the intention? Like, I ask that in meetings all the time, especially when somebody does something that, you know, irritates somebody. I was like, well, what is the intention? Like, how do you put yourself in what their shoes are? How do you create the empathetic understanding of why they may have said that thing? And now you can understand either is there fear involved? What is that thing that is driving that thing that's annoying, and then, or, you know, or frustrating? And if you can get people to articulate the intention of the statement, then you can usually get around and behind it, and frankly back to the truth of what the matter is.
That's interesting. You know, I haven't really thought about it that way. If it's hard for people to do sometimes in the heat of a meeting or in the heat of battle, right, as you're starting to do planning or think about these things, but I guess the psychology also is different depending on how big the company is, right? And so you talked a little bit about, you know, you've got different patterns of connecting dots. You want to walk me through that again, through the small companies now going back up?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've said before, I mean, I have so much respect for entrepreneurs and people who can just blank sheet some idea and put it on a piece of paper and believe that it will work. And, you know, I've said, you know, I'm not necessarily good at connecting those initial dots, but I'm really good at multiplying the dots. And so it's taking that initial, you know, neural connection and saying, okay, how do we actually create the brain? How do we make, you know, if I can go international, I can go to adjacent markets, I can do all these different things, but how do you actually take that, you know, what is the asset? What is that goodness that got created initially, and then figuring out how to multiply that in and around the company. And sometimes it's, you know, I think there's a point in time in which you have to evolve what that originally thing was too, and that's one of the excitements that I'm a part of here at OpenTable, which for the history of the company, it's really been a singular business model. It's, you know, the restaurant will pay a subscription fee, and then they pay $1 per diner. And we're looking at, you know, evolving that pretty considerably, which is really exciting because now it's saying, look, maybe your regulars are free, and if I bring you a diner when you're empty, maybe that should be worth more to you. You know, evolving on, you know, what the value is that you're bringing into an organization. And so,
do you find it more difficult, though, you know, now that you're inside of a public or back in the public company world, right? Because this has been a lot of what, you know, folks in interviews have said is they found themselves, in some cases, you know, ironically, they could actually do longer-term planning when they were at a startup because maybe they had money for 18 months or 24 months or whatever it was, and they weren't necessarily just as focused on, you know, next quarter. Right?
Yeah, there is an element of that, and I think.
How do you prevent that?
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to like some of the 3-year planning, which is like saying, okay, do we have, like, what is the percentage of my resources invested in what I call 24-month revenue or 36-month revenue? Okay. Like, it's not 3-month revenue. I definitely have to have a significant proportion of my, you know, business, like what I call the 3-month revenue, and then I've got like the 24-month revenue. Like, it will eventually generate revenue, but it's not today. And I need to, you know, it's a portfolio like anything else, and I need to make sure that I have enough investments there to make them, you know, because if you just keep your head down and if you just keep on 3-month revenue, then, you know, you may look up and it's now 2 months worth of revenue. And so I think, you know, you always have to be looking for that thing in the future, or what are those adjacencies. And I do say that, you know, I mean, I think this is frankly why you're seeing many private companies stay private a whole lot longer. And, you know, I think that research has been borne out where, you know, a lot of the returns are happening in the private markets instead of the public markets. And having brought companies public for a decade, you know, I can see, you know, how that's interesting and shifting the market. So, it does make it tougher when you have the scrutiny of a public investor. And having been a public investor, I've given that scrutiny. So, I think it's just, you know, how do you maintain the portfolio of, you know, making sure you do have those, you know, 2 or 3 year investments in place.
One of the things that people always come back to around questions around scaling is hiring, right? And especially in this market, very, very difficult to hire. What have you found, you know, that any guiding principles for you around the way that you think about hiring and growing teams?
Well, there's two questions in there, which is like, how do you survive this like Bay Area hiring challenge? And there, I mean, it's a combination of like, hopefully there's like really, I mean, it depends on what you're hiring for too. So like, there's like, sometimes there's really interesting artificial intelligence projects that you're, devising, which is like, how do you like, manage all the inventory of a restaurant with turns and table and configurations of sizes and all these things. And so maybe some engineers are super interested in that. Some people just, generally might be interested in the mission. But when I go to like hire somebody specifically, so much of it is just, do their eyes light up when they talk about 80% of their job? Really, truly. I mean, because if you can see and get that passion out of someone, then they'll work twice as hard for, and be happier doing it, and you'll get the loyalty out of them. And, I mean, it's amazing to me where I will interview a candidate for a job, and when I'm talking about the majority of what they'll be doing, how they have no interest in actually doing that thing. And you go, gosh, and so like, can you get that like Venn diagram of like what you're good at, what the company needs you to do, and what you want to do, all kind of overlapping one another, and then you end up having a good fit and a good connection. But it's surprising to me, even hopefully I weed those out before we actually get to the face-to-face interview. So because you can waste a lot of your organization's time, frankly, interviewing the wrong people, and so making sure that you actually look and say, like, what are your outcomes? Like, are you actually interviewing the right people? Are you getting people closed? And if not, then taking a look at it.
Do you have a favorite interview question?
No, it's funny though, but I usually know within the first 8 minutes whether
that's very precise.
Whether I know it's like it's not quite 10, it's not quite 5. It's usually somewhere in between, which is is this am I going to need a second interview or not? Now you don't always know if you're going to hire in that 8 minutes, but I know relatively soon what and I don't have a set of questions. Usually I like watch and look for the the physical as many of the physical kind of intonation cues as the words that come out. And so I mean a lot of that frankly is gut and instinct, I guess, and seeing and it goes back to just do I see passion about what they're going to be doing, and if I see passion, then I will see they'll put in, like I said, double the effort, and they'll be happier doing it. So
yeah, I mean part of the advantage you have working at companies that have been mission oriented and have these great kind of missions and work cool industries is you can find people that are passionate about those things. Right? It makes it easier than if you're changing the 17th way that someone's browsing ads on the internet.
Or waste management or something even more mundane.
I mean, but with recycling, someone could be really passionate about.
They could be actually, in the earth space. But I mean, there's a lot of people who enjoy a good meal and bringing, having a great dining experience, and so I think that's important. And when you think about the connections that you can make, be it an anniversary or a business meeting, lunch, or date night, I think that's the kind of thing that we're ultimately inspiring.
So we always, when we've got a couple minutes, we do a set of icebreakers just to make sure that people have an idea of kind of who you are as a person in addition. So I'm going to start with an easy one, just given OpenTable. What is your favorite restaurant in San Francisco?
Quince.
Ah, okay. What is the Quince burger? Is it the...
I think it's... The burger's pretty damn good. It's usually it's the cheeses, it's the caviar, it's good.
Okay. What is the defining characteristic of a Navy SEAL?
Speaking that I'm married to one, well, two things. One is I know that you can break a neck with 9 pounds of pressure, but more importantly, it is the kind of loyalty and dedication to purpose. The thing about a Navy SEAL is that you have to disregard the rules in many ways, but you're upholding a higher value and purpose while you're doing that. And so it's this interesting dichotomy of like the maverick kind of going out on your own, but knowing that there's a higher purpose.
That's really cool. I've never heard it described that way. I like that. Favorite, imagine going back. Favorite childhood memory?
Well, I'm one of 7. Oh. Yeah. And so for me, it's the, when all 7 of us were together, and which was either, a holiday, it's watching Sound of Music, and all 7 of us singing like the 7 Von Trapps, which did happen, frighteningly enough. But it's the chaos when all of us would be together.
That's cool.
That was a lot of fun.
Okay, 2 more. If you could meet anyone for dinner, historical is fine, or current, who would you want to have for your dinner table?
I have a few people. I mean, my husband and I have a running joke about who gets the invitation to Thanksgiving.
That's good. That's fun.
And like Joan Rivers, interestingly, was always only cool. Because again. A maverick of her time, and the doors that she had to break down as a woman were fascinating. The intelligence that you have to have, bringing humor into things, but just and the entrepreneurial aspect of it, I think is fascinating. So I think Joan would be in there. I could probably come up with a few more, but
That's cool.
she just passed, so now I don't get the chance.
That's okay. Historical is fun.
It's in my historical.
Last question: what is your favorite movie of all time? Not The Sound of Music.
I was just thinking about this. Believe it or not, I think it might be Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, good one.
Just I think the fact that there is a bow at the end of the tragedy and the horror, I guess that all of those, and it kind of goes back into the hope.
Feels like startup life a little bit?
Well, there is a little bit of that. Hopefully without some of the really bad parts of prison. Right. Although sometimes startup life feels like that. But it just, the sort of like, the world is chaotic. The world is a humongously chaotic place. And I see that now when I watch, intergalactic videos with my son about like exoplanets and black holes and things like that, but it's more, how do you respond to the chaos? Like, how do you take what is in many cases like a really difficult situation, and what is your response to it? How do you make it your own story? How do you make it your own pathway? How do you pull optimism out of really challenging situations, and I think that's a story where through sheer will and optimism that there is a bow at the end, which I kind of like.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for chatting today, and we'll bring you back.
Thanks.
All right.
Cool.